Leo Brent Bozell III has been confirmed as the next U.S. ambassador to South Africa. The conservative activist and media critic has pledged to advance President Donald Trump's invitation to Afrikaners who seek to flee what he calls unjust racial discrimination. He was confirmed in a bloc vote of 97 nominees on a party line vote. All Democrats voted against the confirmation. We're now joined by some interlocutors on this to share their insights on this. International relations expert, Professor John Stremlau, Professor of International Relations and Diplomacy Studies at the University of South Africa, the Thabo Mbeki School of Public and International Affairs, Professor Anthoni von Nieuwkerk, and veteran U.S. diplomat, political analyst, and founding associate editor of the Daily Maverick, Brooks Spector. Good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. And of course, the elephant in the room is about some of the comments that Brent Bozell III has made about South Africa. In fact, Brooks, I'll perhaps start with you. Profile him for us. Who is this man?
Well, Brent Bozell, longtime American conservative writer and political activist and media analyst. One of the things that has been a constant in his life is a critique of and a criticism of mainline news services, newspapers, and all the rest. One of the things that has been part of that as well is that he has worked in the service of right-wing or ultra-conservative political action committees and candidates over the years. And he was originally slated to take a different job in the Trump administration, the global media agency head, but that was in fact cut down basically during the era of the Department of Government Efficiency. And they looked for someplace else to send him, and what came up was the ambassadorship to South Africa. And what you're getting here, assuming that the South African government issues its agrément, its agreement with the appointment, is you will get a man who, in his confirmation hearing, said, among other things, that he will represent the Trump administration, no brainer there, but that he will strenuously and energetically try to carry out the policies of, or encourage the policies of, the Trump administration, with particular emphasis, obviously, on South Africa. And that, of course, comes in the context of what has been a growing set of disputes between the two countries. I think it's important to note, and Oliver, you and I talked about this briefly earlier today, that ambassadors generally don't work as freelance people. They work under the understanding that they are assigned to a country to advance the agenda that the administration, the president, the Secretary of State have set out. And so the way they frame it may be their own, but you don't see an ambassador running cross-grain or counter to the policies that the administration has set out. Keep in mind, too, one other further point, and I'm sure Anthony and John know this well, that an embassy is not simply an ambassador. There are, in a largish embassy like the one in South Africa, there are a number of other people, political analysts, economic analysts, whose job it is to report accurately and comprehensively about what really is happening in South Africa, rather than simply the polemics that might be issued from Washington. Yeah. And one of the tasks is obviously going to be somehow getting Brent Bozell to embrace the realities and the reporting rather than simply the rhetoric out of Washington.
Yeah. Prof. Stremlau, I want to bring you into the conversation here. I want to read for you a quote from a letter that Brent Bozell wrote in 1987. And he said, I am proud to become a member of the Coalition Against ANC Terrorism. Now, that was in 1987, and the stance of Donald Trump in 2025 isn't much different, and one would assume that Bozell would once again espouse that sort of politics. I don't assume that he would be readily welcomed by the body politic here in South Africa. What's your reading of the environment he will find himself in?
I think it's a waste of time, frankly, and discussing this. Brooks has covered it very well, and I didn't hear of Brent Bozell before he was nominated, and he's had no background in foreign affairs or experience in it. And I think that when Trump articulated back in February 7th of 2025, the executive order that had two policy provisions in it, that the cutting of assistance and the giving refuge to white Afrikaners, that were destined for genocide, as Trump has said, that it's just Bozell is just a footnote, and I don't think he's going to succeed. And I think that Durko is experienced enough for dealing with the Americans. They've outclassed the Americans repeatedly. And I just reread Ronald Lamola's answer to Rubio's Substack that were related to the G20, but that South Africa would be frozen out of it. And I can't see that Bozell will make any difference whatsoever.
Yeah. Prof. Nieuwkerk, I want to bring you into the conversation. Again, I want to quote from what Bozell said before the senatorial confirmation hearings that he set before in April this year. He said, "I will communicate our objections to South Africa's geostrategic drift from non-alignment towards our competitors, including China, Russia, and Iran." He goes forward and says, "I would press South Africa to end proceedings against Israel before the International Court of Justice." Now, we know that China and Russia are great friends of South Africa, some of our closest geopolitical allies, and we know that South Africa will not end proceedings against Israel in the International Court of Justice. One would imagine that this is dead out of water, the appointment of Bozell, that he wouldn't find much favor in advancing Donald Trump's ideals, politics, and agenda in South Africa. And typically the U.S. ambassador would have an open line into the union buildings, would have an open line into the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Do you imagine that it would be different this time around?
Yeah, Oliver, let me make a couple of quick points. It's important for countries to have ambassadors to represent their governments, state interests, and it's a line of communication. And ambassadors and diplomats play a very important role, whether you like them or not. So it's good, in my view, that America has appointed an ambassador. We should do the same so that we have open lines of communication. Having said that, this Bozell is not a professional diplomat or an ambassador or foreign policy expert. He's a politician. He's a political appointment by the Trump administration, and he carries a very clear mandate. You know, we've mentioned this just now. He wants to achieve three things during his time here. Get us to pivot away from China, make sure that the Afrikaners are protected from genocide and other forms of oppression. And then thirdly, I think the bigger agenda really is the national security strategy, Oliver, which was released last week by the Trump administration, that explains very clearly the Trump view of the world. And Africa doesn't really feature largely in it, except in the instances where African countries have valuable minerals, strategic minerals, and energy sources, and that's what the Americans want, and that is why some countries in Africa become more important than others. There's a couple of examples: Egypt, probably Algeria, Kenya definitely, and now the Congo. So I think it's going to be, we'll have to bite on our teeth, Oliver, and for Durko and for the rest of us to deal with Bozell, who is Donald Trump's man in South Africa, so to speak. And he's going to push very hard and quite aggressively this agenda that I think most of us find very difficult to contemplate.
Prof. Stremlau, South Africa still has the option and the prerogative to reject the appointment of Bozell when he presents his credentials to the head of state or an elective thereof, presumably the Minister of International Relations. If you were advising the Minister and the President, should they reject his credentials?
No, I wouldn't presume to advise that Durko anything. I think Durko is more than crammed with talented people. But I would be interested in Brooks's, given his experience within government, what options do you see as relevant for South Africa going forward?
Yeah, Brooks, especially given that you are a former U.S. diplomat, you've been in the system, you understand the mechanics and the behind-the-scenes negotiations, bartering and politicking that takes place. If you were in the ear of the President and the Minister of International Relations, should they reject or accept the credentials of Bozell?
Well, no, I think they should accept them. They should accept them, but they should make it clear that their policies are their policies and that they're not necessarily going to simply make a 180-degree turn solely because a newly appointed ambassador comes in and says, these are the things I would like you to do. But as you and I talked earlier today in a different format, this is, in a way, a very good opportunity for South African government officials and society as a whole to begin to give Brent Bozell a much bigger and more textured, more nuanced understanding of this country. And there are lots of ways to do that, even if it doesn't mean that he is going to send a message back to Washington, which may or may not be read, that says, wait a minute, folks, our plans and our ideas are all wrong and we have to change them. That won't happen. Diplomats within the embassy below Bozell's level, of course, always have the opportunity in the American system to issue what is called a dissent channel telegram, which by regulation, the writer or writers of it cannot be punished for having expressed a view which is different than that of the standing policy. And so I would encourage as much as possible to bring Bozell into a larger dialogue and a larger discussion. I'm the only person in this group who's actually read 4 of his books. I sat down for an orgy of this on a weekend and read through 4 solid works completely, cover to cover, of what he had written. He has foreign affairs experience in a very special and perhaps unique kind of way. He was he worked on things like the Iran-Contra issue many years ago as a filmmaker on behalf of the opposition to the Sandinista government. So he's used to understanding the media, and that's been his stock in trade all these years. And I think that you and other media professionals will want to engage him in robust discussions with other people about his presumptions and his thoughts. Doesn't mean he's going to change his mind, but it's going to force an understanding that things are not necessarily the way they were seen in a speech by Donald Trump. And that's going to be important. It's also going to be very important, I forget who said it now, that it would be enormously useful for South Africa to finally get an ambassador in Washington as well.
Yeah.
Someone who is experienced and someone who understands their way around both America and international organizations, and do it quickly,
Sure.
rather than letting this drag on as it has been.
Yeah, well, I guess his Oscar is perhaps as lost as Donald Trump's Nobel Peace Prize is perhaps still in the mail. Just a last question, Prof, for Nieuwkerk, for you. Does Durko have the talent and the historical depth in terms of institutional knowledge to tame what would be a Donald Trump offensive in Pretoria through Bozell?
I'm gonna do what John has just done, to say I'm not presuming that I can advise Durko or pass judgment on whether they are professional enough to deal with this. But let me say, in the spirit of creativity, and I'm very happy to hear that Brooks has read all 4 books of this character. Remember, this man is a political project. He's not a diplomat. He's not an ambassador.
Trust me, it was
what we as South Africans should do is understand that this man comes with a Trump message. And I would advise, as a South African, that we bring together our former, retired and current diplomats, our intellectuals, our think tank experts, our academics, and our business people around the table to say, here we are, we've got 3 or 4 more years of Trump and whatever follows the Trump, the MAGA movement. We have a representative in the room. He's going to run to the Voortrekker Monument to talk to the Afrikaners first. What do we do as a nation in terms of this relationship with America? And I'm quite sure that we've got creative juices and we will be able to develop a counter proposal that doesn't play into the hands of Bozell. Remember, I'm not naive about what he is going to do here. He wants to remove us from the ICJ case against Israel. He wants to turn us away from Russia, China, and the BRICS alliance. He wants us to change so-called race laws. He's going to interfere in domestic affairs, big time. And we need to prepare hard for what is coming.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your insights, Prof. Nieuwkerk. Really do appreciate it. Thank you so much, Professor John Stremlau, as well as Brooks Spector, joining me there discussing the confirmation of Brent Leo Bozell III as the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. Of course, we wait for a response from Durko on this, and of course, perhaps even whether or not they'll be accepting or rejecting his letters of credence when he presents them.